Some folks in Washington, D.C., and Arlington, Ohio, Pennsylvania. It's like I'm really happy for the DMV folks that the rain is held off. Things are pretty nice so far. And what else? Yeah, the Kent, New York, Centralville, Maryland, Montana, Missouri, New Jersey, Delaware, Gaithersburg. So many people. Someone very proud to be coming in from the Bronx. And we're going to give it another minute or so as more people join. So glad so many of you can be here tonight for folks on the East Coast for this program. I'm really excited about it. And for folks who are just joining, I've asked for all of our attendees just drop where they're zooming in from in the chat. Feel free to say hello, talk about the weather, but we'll get started pretty soon. Glad you are safe from the hurricane in Florida. We're getting some of the remnants of the storm pretty soon, but I'm glad you are safe and you have internet. Well, I think we have critical mass so far, so let's dive in. Hello and welcome to the National Museum of Women in the Arts latest virtual program, NMWA Collects New Acquisitions. I'm Gabby Awuma, the Senior Membership Manager at NMWA. I'm so glad you could join us for this special virtual presentation by our Assistant Curator, Hannah Shambroom. Tonight, you'll hear from Hannah as she shares some of the museum's recent acquisitions, works that entered the collection or were acquired by us between 2021 and about fall 2023. First of all, I want to give a very special thank you to our donors and trustees whose gifts of art and philanthropic support allowed us to purchase and add new works to our collection, allowing us to expand, diversify, and include more people into the art historical narrative, which is really exciting. And, we want to champion women in the arts, and we can't do that without the generous donations from all of you. So thank you so much for that. And before we begin and I hand things over to Hannah, I encourage you to use the Q&A feature to share your questions for our speaker. We'll have 15 minutes of Q&A at the end of this presentation. We'll do our best to answer as many questions as possible before the event concludes at 7. And so I will stop sharing my screen. And I am very happy to turn things over to Hannah.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight. As Gabby said, my name is Hannah, and I'm the assistant curator here at NMWA, and I'm very excited to share a selection of recent acquisitions to our collection with you. I'm gonna just take a sec to share my screen so you have something nice to look at. So as I'm sure many people know, NMWA's collection spans most time periods, mediums, a variety of themes and subjects. So the works that I'll be sharing today will reflect this. Some are contemporary, while others are more historic. And you'll see a mix of 2- and 3-dimensional works and a range of subjects. I know oftentimes people are really interested in how works enter a museum collection, and this happens in a pretty big variety of ways, but broadly speaking, works can be donated. And as Gabby shared, we're so grateful to the generosity of our supporters in this sense. Much of our collection has been built through donations, and we're very, very grateful for this. Other times, works can be purchased by the museum using dedicated funds or monetary donations. But no matter how a work enters our collection, a lot of consideration goes into the acquisition. We are often thinking about how we can best support the artists that we represent, as well as artists not yet in our collection. We consider how the work might fit into the rest of the collection and how we plan to exhibit it, either in our collection galleries, which you can see an image of here, or in special exhibitions. And I'm sure, as many of you know, we were recently closed for about 2 years for a building renovation. I hope that some of you have had the chance to visit if you're local or if you come from out of town for a weekend in DC. But if not, this image is kind of a nice little glimpse. But in that time, it was a really great opportunity to reconsider our collection and think about how to represent it in the new space. So it was a really good opportunity for us to bring out some visitor favorites, but also some new works that were acquired in the time that we were closed to the public. So the works and the artists that I'm about to show you were all officially brought into the collection within the last 4 years. Some of them are things that are currently on view or were recently on view. So if you've had the opportunity to visit, you might recognize them. But then I'm also going to share a sneak peek at some works that have not yet been shown. The first work that I'm going to share is this painting by Eva Gonzalez, Portrait of a Young Woman. This work is currently on view on our mezzanine level if you've had the chance to visit. And this was the first work by this artist to enter our collection, so we're very grateful to have this one. Gonzalez is a French Impressionist painter who was active in Paris in the mid to late 19th century. She was particularly active in art and literary circles from a very young age through her father, who was a writer. But she really began her artistic training as a teenager, and she became a student of and actually model for Edouard Manet. She was Manet's only formal student. And through her studies, she gained quite a bit of technical skill, but you can see in this painting, her style was also marked by intuitive brushstrokes. Like many Impressionists, she was particularly interested in color and texture and how they could be affected by changing light conditions. This work is dated from the 1870s in the middle of her career. So by this point, she's sort of developed her own style and sort of loosened up her technique. You can see here some of her brushworks are a bit looser and a bit more gestural. You can also see this nuance in the two details that I've pulled here through the sitter's dress, specifically the way she's rendered the white fabric. By, sort of zooming in on these details here, we can see the many colors and textures that overall give the impression of this white textile. And you can see, I think, the way that she's depicted these different fabrics and sort of their varying degrees of lightness. You can see the satin sheen on the sleeves and the bodice that really contrasts with the sheer stole around her arms. And then on the right, you can see the wispy feathers of the hat. In the background of the image, you can also see, oh, I'm sorry, let's go back for a sec. In the background of the image on the left, you can see some influences of Japanese art, particularly on the left-hand side corner, and what appears to be a pillow and some of the sort of floral decorative motifs that were used. Japanese art had a significant influence on French Impressionism at the end of the 19th century. And one hallmark of that was the inclusion of these types of bright floral patterns and colors. Young women were a very common subject for Gonzalez in her work. She primarily painted portraits, still lifes, and domestic scenes featuring women and children. One of the reasons for this, of course, was that as a woman artist, she was a little bit hindered in the types of subject matter available to her. So unlike her male contemporaries and the male impressionists, she wasn't as able to freely wander around the city, paint outside, or seek out those types of scenes of daily life. So much of her work depicts more interior scenes like this one. But this is a really beautiful example of her portraiture. The next work that I'm excited to share is this work by Sonia Clark called Mom's Wisdom or Cotton Candy. And if anyone visited the museum in 2021, you might have seen our Sonia Clark exhibition called Tatter, Bristle, and Mend. This work was included in it, but it's also on view right now on our fourth floor as a complementary work to the exhibition Holding Ground, which features artists' books. Clark is an artist who NMWA's curators were interested in for a very long time, even prior to her solo exhibition at the museum. And prior to that, we had, I think, at least 4 works by the artist in our collection. And following the exhibition, we were able to acquire several additional works by the artist directly. So we were able to acquire this work, Mom's Wisdom, which is a photograph, Curls, which is a sculptural work made of combs, Esther Malango's Touch, which is a work that includes some of her beading, and then a neon piece titled Schiavo Ciao, which was also part of the exhibition. So this was an instance where acquiring these additional works really allowed us to round out what we're able to showcase of the artist's practice. The works that we previously had in the collection, and many of the ones I just mentioned as well, were sculptural pieces. And so this is the first photograph by the artist to enter the collection. Clark was born here in Washington, D.C., so she does have a local connection. Her mother was Jamaican and her father was Trinidadian, but of Yoruba descent. And they really distilled in her a knowledge of the African diaspora and an appreciation for Afro-Caribbean traditions. She's known as a fiber artist. Her maternal grandmother was a tailor who taught her how to sew, which is a practice that she uses frequently in her fiber-based work. And she also cites childhood memories of having her hair braided by family members as inspiration to her current work. Hair is very important to her in her work as both a material and a symbol. She's called hair the primordial fiber, and she points out that every single strand of hair holds all of our DNA. So it's a marker of our identity and also as a connection to our ancestors. In this central work here called Hair Wreath, you'll see that she uses actual human hair as a material, but she also uses other objects as a stand-in for hair. On the left is a work titled Flat Twist, where she uses dark thread to emulate hair. And then the work on the right is a detail of the sculpture Curls, which is part of our collection, where she's used black plastic combs to sort of emulate the curl pattern of hair. In this work, Mom's Wisdom or Cotton Candy, she's actually photographed her own hands holding a pile of her mother's white hair. Again, she feels that hair really connects us to our ancestors, both living and deceased. Additionally, white hair is a sign of aging, but also the wisdom that comes with it. I mentioned that her father was of Yoruba descent, and in Yoruba culture, the color white is very much associated with wisdom. And, elder people are very revered as well. The title references cotton candy. So, it sort of balances out this idea of aging and wisdom, her mother's wisdom, with light, fluffy cotton candy, which of course we can see the hair sort of looks like piled into her hands. Um, of course, this has connections probably for many of us to a childhood sweet, but there are also darker connotations to this concept of cotton candy as well. We know that sugar was a key industry of the triangle trade, and its production was supported by enslaved people who transported it to the Caribbean from West Africa. And many other works in her practice draw this connection between hair and sugar and her ancestors and her family's history. So this is certainly a common thread throughout much of her work. And I mention this because I think it exemplifies how she uses materials to reconsider and redress difficult histories, things that we, were perhaps not taught overtly in school. But in spite of this, this is, of course, a very tender image. You can see she's really kind of cradling the hair in her hands as if she's holding, of course, literally holding a piece of her mother, but it's as if she's holding sort of all the knowledge that came before her and all she can learn from her ancestors. This next work is by Alison Sarr, and if you've been to NMWA recently, you know how much we love Alison Sarr in our galleries. We've shown many prints by the artists over the years, but this was a very exciting acquisition for us as it was the first sculptural work by the artist to enter the collection. Sarr is a sculptor and a printmaker, painter, and mixed media artist, but of those, she does primarily consider herself a sculptor. So we're very fortunate to have gotten this work to kind of round out that side of her practice in our collection. Alison Sarr is the daughter of Betty Sarr, who is a well-known printmaker, collage, and assemblage artist who was very involved in the Black arts movement of the 1970s. Alison Sarr was born in 1956, and she grew up surrounded by and also influenced by visual artists, poets, writers, and musicians that were emerging out of the Black Power movement of the 1960s. In her own practice, interestingly, Sarr never received formal training in sculpture specifically. She studied art history and studio art. And in her practice, she primarily relies on more common tools that could be found at a hardware store and have sort of more accessible techniques. Often in her sculpted work, you can see the mark of the tools left on the medium. So you can see in these details on the right here, the texture that has been left behind in the wood from carving it. In terms of style and subject matter, Sar's multiracial identity certainly influences her work. Many of her subjects concern Black female identity, womanhood, and influences of the African diaspora and folk art. Her work very often invokes the body, in particular the Black female body. And she sees the body as a marker of identity. Of course, the body is something that is very personal to our own identities and ourselves, but she points out that it also becomes a vessel for politics. The female body is often used in politics as a launch pad to enact policy and discuss issues of basic human rights. And in her work, she uses it to investigate these often very stark and emotional issues. She's particularly interested in looking at how Black women have endured the politicizing of their bodies for ages and continue to do so. In much of her work, she incorporates and transforms found objects. So she'll combine found objects with other sculpted elements. In this work, you can see that the figure is wearing a skirt of found mini skillets, reminiscent perhaps of Josephine Baker's famous banana skirt. But of course, in this version with the skillets, there is much more physical as well as emotional weight to it. And she also wields one of the mini skillets in her hand. And the work is really an exploration of identity and womanhood. The skillets form this sort of connection to the kitchen and the instruments that come out of them, which are representative of the many roles that have been foisted upon women over time as homemakers, as caretakers, as mothers, as providers. And there's, of course, a weight to these roles, which is reflected in these, cast iron, tiny little skillets. We can sort of feel the weight of the figure being bared down by these domestic duties and these types of responsibilities that are placed on women. But there's a positive connotation, I think, as well. The figure here is posed in this almost warrior-like stance, and she looks like she's ready to both protect and nourish. This is another work that entered our collection during the period while we were closed. It's by the artist Beatriz Miezi, and it was shown in the exhibition The Sky's the Limit last fall. This was especially exciting to be able to showcase it in this way. You can see in the image here how it's hanging from the ceiling. And this was a really great work to kind of show off the new abilities of our new space and how we suddenly have this ability to showcase work that we previously wouldn't have been able to install quite as easily. Looking at this work, you can see it's quite colorful. It looks like perhaps it's made of plastic or other light materials. And that's very deceiving because it's actually about 450 pounds. It was one of the heavier works that was installed in that exhibition, particularly hanging from the ceiling like that. So we're very fortunate and grateful that with this building renovation, we now have reinforced structures and systems that allow us to finally exhibit work like this and, show it off in our galleries. Miezi is an artist who's known for paintings that mix basic forms. She'll often include circles, rectangles, floral motifs, undulating lines, and waves. And her paintings typically incorporate bright colors and very strong lines. And as you can see here, she's sort of translated those visual elements into this sculptural work as well. While she really primarily was a painter, she first began working in 3 dimensions in 2004 while working on a set design for a dance company. So in her 3-dimensional work, dance has been a very large influence, and she's felt very inspired by this movement and motion and energy that often coincides with dance. As part of the set design for this production that she was working on, she created sculptural works that hung down. So that sort of forced her to think about translating these two-dimensional design elements into three dimensions and sort of bring them to life and reflecting the spirit of dance, bring them into motion as well. So that led to the creation of her first mobile sculpture in 2008. This work, which is titled Marola, was created with two other related sculptures titled Mariola and Marilola. All three were created between 2010 and 2015. And the title of this work, Marola, is a Portuguese word meaning little waves, which is a reference to the ripples that appear on top of water. So while this work isn't, directly related to dance or the theater production that she had been working on, it certainly still reflects this sense of motion. As you can see in this image here, especially with lighting, there's this element of reflection and the way the reflections kind of dance around on the floor and on the walls surrounding it. So that sort of spirit of motion and element of movement is very much present in this work as well. Mia's aesthetic was certainly shaped, of course, and inspired by dance, but it was also influenced by her birthplace of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, which she describes as this very bright and energetic landscape. She said that one of the most striking things for her about her home city is the intense relationship between the urban city and very real nature. You can see some of the forms she's used here are very reflective of that. She uses some of these sort of cloud-based lines, again, these chains that have these sort of bulbous forms hanging out of them, these bright fabric flower elements that are dangling down. So the sculpture really does sort of reflect this undulating rhythm. It includes very reflective materials. So as you walk around it, you can see yourself and anyone else in the gallery reflected back at you. And then these very bright orbs of varying colors. And she's called this work a reunion of materials. So as I mentioned, it is deceptively very heavy. And I'm sure even looking at this, the elements on the left might look sort of like plastic. You can see the fabric flowers and imagine that they might be quite light. The little chains hanging down don't look like they carry a lot of weight. But in fact, the work is made of acrylic, wood, and cut copper and aluminum. So altogether, there really is quite a bit of weight to it. And it's sort of this trick of the eye that it looks as though it's floating in space. I think particularly with some of the cloud-like forms closer to the top. But in reality, it's really kind of heavy hanging down from the gallery ceiling and to the floor. And one thing that I really loved about this work when it was installed in our galleries, and this was something that I think, I couldn't have anticipated until I saw it installed, but it actually was sort of activated by the motion of people walking around it. And in that way, the work was very responsive to viewers and to its audience as well. As people walked around it, or even just as, air was sort of blowing through the galleries, it was set into motion. And so some of the metal elements that were hanging down would, very gently kind of chime into each other. And it created this resonant sound that was really beautiful and very unexpected. And, something that is an element of the work that I don't think I would have even realized could happen without our newfound ability to be able to showcase these types of works in our galleries. These next few works that I'm going to show are a series of photographs by the artist Lala Asadi. The previous works that I have just highlighted are all works that are either currently on view or had recently been on view. And these next few are going to be more sort of behind the scenes sneak peeks at works that have not yet been shown at the museum. These two works and then a couple other that I'll show in just a moment were part of a large donation of approximately 20 works by this artist that we recently received. This is very exciting. We did previously have a work by Lala Sadie in our collection. But again, when we receive these types of large donations, it really enables us to showcase the breadth of an artist's work and really sort of dive deep into their practice. So we're very excited to be able to show works from a variety of different series. A little bit of background on the artist. Lala Essaydi was born in Morocco, and she's really known for photographing women in the Arab world. In her work, she often will create a dialogue between the past and the present, as well as between fantasy and reality. And if either of these two works are looking familiar, you might recognize this large-scale triptych titled Bullets Revisited 3. This work is on view in our collection galleries in the photography section. As I mentioned, this was already existing in our collection, and it's certainly one of our favorites to show, and definitely a work that visitors, I think, gravitate towards. So this new batch of donations will really sort of allow us to show off other series that the artists have worked on, including her harem series, Converging Territories, and a series called Les Femmes du Maroc that she completed. Whoops. Sadie's work includes references to art history, to contemporary culture, to politics, as well as her own memories and experiences. As I mentioned, she's Moroccan. She grew up in Marrakesh, which is a very large city right in the middle of Morocco. And she was raised in a traditionally Muslim household, but attended school in Paris. And so she lived and studied in Europe, and she also eventually moved and lived in the United States. And it was while she was living in Paris that she encountered the work of 19th century Orientalists, such as Jean-Léon Gérôme and Eugène Delacroix, whose work often featured these types for fantastical imagery of harems and seductive female nudes. Of course, painted through the male gaze and very much intended for a Western male audience. And in her studies and in her work, Sadie began to recognize that the world portrayed in these works was entirely fictional. But she was very intrigued by its effect on viewers and on international audiences. She began working sort of with the assumption that more contemporary audiences would understand that these scenes painted by Orientalists were entirely voyeuristic and they were imaginary and not necessarily based on anything found in reality. But as she began kind of showing her work and speaking with people, she found that that wasn't necessarily an implicit thing that viewers understood. So in her work, she began to reappropriate elements of Orientalism, and she used these techniques and styles and imagery to actually reveal and question assumptions that the global West makes about Middle Eastern culture. Her process is incredibly labor intensive. In some works, as you can see, one example is this work on the left, or even in this previous work, Bullets Revisited, she hand paints calligraphy onto the faces, bodies, clothing, and backdrop found in the image. And this is notable because calligraphy was an art form that was traditionally only done by men. So she's sort of reclaiming that art form for herself in her own practice. She then stages her subjects in settings that she's constructed, or in some cases, existing spaces. And she's very interested, as you can probably see in these images, in the relationship between the female body and architectural spaces, or the built environment that women come to occupy and, live their lives in. The image on the left here comes from the artist's series Les Femmes du Maroc, in which women occupy stage spaces and are entirely surrounded by text, both in the setting in which they find themselves, as well as the fabric and cloth that they clothe themselves in. And the title of this series plays on the Delacroix painting Les Femmes d'Alger, which takes a very voyeuristic perspective of women huddled together in a harem setting. And so while Sadie is retaining some of the compositional elements and some of the gestures and details of Delacroix's work, the setting and the dress of the subjects is completely different. The work is, stripped of some of the brighter and more opulent colors that Orientalism is known for. And the figures here, rather than being nude and on display, are fully and modestly clothed and again covered in this handwritten calligraphy. There's certainly still voyeuristic elements. We are looking at a scene of women gathered together and speaking, but in a Sadie's version, the viewer feels more like an intruder, like we're sort of walking in on a conversation or a moment that we're not entirely privy to. The work on the right is part of the artist's Harem Revisited series. And in this work, she's really completely turning the tables on the fetishization seen in Orientalist painting and many of the stereotypical views of Arab women that are often depicted in Orientalist paintings. Here you can definitely see some elements of the colorful background found in much Orientalist work, but much of the context for the setting, which we know from her title is a harem, is removed. So the subject is really the central focus of her work rather than this fantastical idea of a harem itself. Um, Unlike many of the Orientalist paintings, which feature women sort of laying down in provocative positions, the subject in a Sadie's photograph here is posed more like a traditional portrait, I suppose, seated upright with her hands in her lap. And perhaps the most notable feature, of course, is that the subject is making eye contact with us as the viewer. So almost in a pose that sort of challenges the viewer's gaze and challenges our assumptions of what we know of this culture that, in visual history has really sort of been marked by stereotype and male fantasy. And then I'm just going to show and mention these last two works here. Um, these are two works by Gwen John titled La Petite Modèle, and on the right, Women with Hands Crossed. These works are also a little bit of a sneak peek. Again, we received a large donation of works by Gwen John, and these will be included in an upcoming Gwen John exhibition that NMWA will be hosting in 2027. So this is definitely a sneak peek, but if you keep this in your mind for the next 3 years, you'll see this work featured in the context of that exhibition. John is a Welsh artist who primarily painted anonymous women subjects. We see them as sort of in every woman. We don't know their exact names or their relationship with the artist. But as you can see in these two examples, they are often rendered in rather muted tones. John's background as a young woman, she studied at the Slade School of Art, which is in London. It was the only art school in the UK that accepted women at the time. And the model of that school was to have sort of a student-teacher mentor relationship. So she received in-depth training in a very sort of small setting and almost a one-on-one training, I would say. Um, she primarily studied figure drawing and, practices more figural works. Students at the school were encouraged to copy works of old masters that were found in London museums as a means of practice and a way to sort of get mastery in again, this sort of more figural style. So much of her early work does follow more of that style of early masters, but the works that we see here are from slightly later in her career when she had developed her own style more. And we can see that that's marked more so by these flatter compositions. In some works, she really sort of removes any background context entirely, as you can see in the work on the right here. It's really just more of a flat background there. And then another thing that's characteristic of some of her later style that we can see in these two images is this three-quarter seated pose. So she's really kind of rendering her figures almost from the waist up, focusing much more on their upper bodies and faces. She had kind of an interesting approach to her work. She said that she painted a lot, but she didn't often finish her paintings. And she felt that a painting ought to be done in just 1 to 2 sittings, and that any more work beyond that was sort of an unnecessary time to be putting into them. And I think you can really see in these two examples here evidence of those sort of quick and gestural brushstrokes that she really became known for. So those are the works that I am highlighting. Again, I really just want to sort of thank our donors and our members. Of course, all of the support that we receive goes directly towards our ability to acquire, research, and exhibit works like these and many more. I hope that anyone local to DC is able to come to the museum and see our brand new beautiful collection galleries as well as some of our upcoming exhibitions. But for anyone who's not local to DC, really appreciate the participation in these virtual programs. And we're so happy to be able to share a lot of the work in the museum with you all in this way as well.
Thank you so much, Hannah. That was amazing. I love learning about all the works in our collection and, getting some special sneak peeks behind the scenes. And I can't wait to see a lot of them on our walls. So now that that is concluded, it's time for Q&A. I know we've already received some questions in the chat and then also using the Q&A feature. So please feel free to drop whatever questions you have there and we'll try to answer as many as possible. I'm going to just go ahead and stop sharing my screen so I can talk to Hannah directly. So, and also you may want to have your presentation handy because some of them are about specific works. So one of the first ones that came in is about the Eva Gonzalez paintings, and some people had some questions about um, her style being considered impressionistic. So, but it looks, in some ways a bit more like, please forgive me for my my very rusty art history knowledge, but I wouldn't say like romantic sort of like I get a Manet vibe at some points, but it is very much within that impressionist era. So how did she fit in with that group, or how is she, her style described that in that way?
Sure. I'm just gonna pull this back up again so we can see the detail that I was looking at. Let's see. So we can see, ooh, let's see, let me get to the correct slide here. There we go. Um, I'm having trouble making this big at this point. But anyway, you can see here, I think, more of a close-up detail. And I'm sorry, I sort of lost track of the exact question that you were asking, but I think it was about Impressionist style and the types of brushstrokes that I had mentioned. Um,
Yeah, it's a combo of that, like someone said, it's like it feels more like perhaps more transitional between realism and impressionism. And then there was another question about intuitive brushstrokes and what does that mean? But we can start with the impressionism one first.
Sure. Yeah. So I guess, in terms of a transition of style, there were sort of several key markers of an impressionist style that Eva Gonzalez would have been trained in. One is the color that I mentioned. Color was really sort of used not only to reflect a realistic view of a subject, but also to sort of capture like the of the moment gestures. So it was used as this, visual technique to sort of capture the moment as well as to depict an actual subject. So that's sort of where I mentioned um, how she's using many different colors to create, particularly I would say in the dress of the figure here. It's a white dress, but we can see in this more detailed image all of the colors that actually go into creating something that we receive visually as a white dress. Lighting was also something that was important. I know for many impressionists, of course, the idea of sort of painting outside, capturing these sort of en plein air scenes was incredibly important, though, as I mentioned, women had less access to that. So in these interior scenes, lighting was sort of just as important, but applied in a slightly different way. And then again, the brushstrokes, I think this might be the second part of the question that you had asked.
Mhm.
This is a little bit of a long-winded response.
All
Um,
good.
but in a lot of realist painting, um, the brushstrokes are very tight, nearly imperceptible, and it creates this very realistic effect. In Impressionism, artists are using much looser, bigger, more gestural strokes. So you can see, I would say, particularly in the detail of the sleeves here and the hat, you can really sort of see the gesture behind the stroke that she was creating. It's much larger, and it really kind of conveys the motion. It's not an exact, realistic, perfect depiction of a sleeve, but it, sort of captures the moment, and it really kind of captures the gesture of her practice and then also of the sitter as well.
Thank you for that very thorough explanation. I appreciate that. Um, the next question I'm seeing is about When John. And so you mentioned the upcoming exhibition that we have. Will any of her work be on display before the exhibition?
Yeah, great question. So actually, shoot, I shouldn't have closed out my screen here. I'll put it up again. Um, So the work on the left here, La Petite Modèle, is currently on view in our collection galleries. So that's a really great one to come to the museum if you're interested in Gwen John and you want to see her work before 2027. Um, that work is on view. Um, we are sort of always considering changes to the collection galleries. We typically switch things up every couple of years, so there certainly might be the opportunity to include some more of those works. But if you're hoping to see something right now, this work, La Petite Modèle, is currently on view.
Thank you. All right, and then our next question. This one I'm directing towards you personally, not speaking on behalf of the museum, but are there areas or artists that like are on your wish list that like if money was no object and you could buy whatever artwork you want, what would you love to see in the collection?
Ooh, okay, that's a very fun question. I mean, I think I'm very interested in fiber art. I think that's a very exciting medium. I think it's, a really exciting medium for NMWA to explore, of course, because of some of the historical context of the medium. Fiber-based practices were, kind of often delegated as craft and not considered fine art, but we know, of course, through centuries of fiber-based works, that that's not the case. So that's a medium that I'm very interested in, definitely. To put in a plug for the upcoming exhibition this fall, which will feature the work of Suchitra Matai. I think Matai's work is absolutely stunning. She includes a lot of fiber-based practices, with needlepoint, weaving, all types of things. And I think her work is absolutely stunning. I'm also a big fan of Lisa Butler, who makes these contemporary quilts, which are really beautiful. Um, so I mean, there's so many artists that I wish I could have personally as well as
Mhm.
see in NMWA's collection. But those are two that I'm excited about at the moment.
Okay, I love that. Some of my personal favorites that are on view right now are Laura Tizier's
Mhm.
felt houses and huts. They make me so happy every time I see them in the collection galleries, and I would love to have one of those for myself.
I know those are so beautiful. I also, it would be completely unpractical, but I really love in the back gallery of the museum, there's a very large work by Deborah Butterfield, which is a sculpture of a horse, and I absolutely love that work. It would certainly not fit anywhere except in the perfect space that it is, that it finds itself in our galleries, but I love that work too.
It's a really good one. I love seeing like walking by and seeing it in the entryway.
Mhm.
It's
Absolutely.
awesome. And I think we've got to all the questions that are in the chat or in Q&A. If there are there any other questions? I know I see someone did ask, will this be the recording be available? And it will be in the coming weeks. And I will give a plug to our YouTube channel in a hot sec. Um, but if there aren't any other questions, we can start wrapping things up. Hannah, do you have any last minute thoughts?
Um, I don't think so. I mean, again, I'm so thankful to everyone sitting in on this. I'm glad to sort of, see everyone virtually, and I'm happy that we can kind of continue to reach people this way. Again, if you find yourself in DC, if you live here, if you come here in the next few months, I hope that you'll stop by the museum and see all of these works in person, as well as many, many more.
Amazing. Awesome. Thank you, Hannah. And I just have a few slides to share with a few plugs for a few upcoming things. So we have some great events. Most of these sharing are in person, but we do have another online program later this month on August 23rd, Art Chat at 5, the Dog Days of Summer. The registration links for these events are available online at nmwa.org/what's-on/calendar. We hope you can join us for any one of these in-person or online events. In addition, like Hannah also shared, Stitcher Matai Myth from Matter opens next month, September 20th. The Circles reception is on September 17th, member preview day, September 19th. And Hannah is so gracious and lovely and is going to be giving a curator's perspective talk on the exhibition in October, tentatively scheduled for October 23rd, but it may be pushed to October 30th, but an invitation will go out pretty soon. And then also we'll be having a fresh talk. Apologies for the error in spelling her name, but with Sujitra Matai and Aruna D'Souza, December 11th. Our in-person public programs, they are recorded and uploaded to our YouTube channel. So if you're unable to visit in person, please be sure to check out our YouTube, which plugging here again, all of our virtual programs and public programs are recorded and on our YouTube channel. Right here, you see a screenshot of one of our virtual artist panels from New Worlds Women to Watch 2024. This exhibition closes this weekend, so if you're unable to see the exhibition, definitely check out the artist panels on YouTube. They're really great. The artists have so insightful, have amazing work. So I hope you check them out along with our other virtual programs and public programs we've offered. Great and awesome. So I just want to say thank you again for joining us. I think this was amazing. I'm thankful for everybody who made the time to see Hannah's presentation and join us and learn more about our recent acquisitions. And I hope to see you either in person at the museum or at another virtual program in the coming weeks and months. So thank you so much. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your Wednesday.
Thanks, Gabby.
Thank you.